I remember the day I found out about the betrayal like it was yesterday. It's funny how certain details stick with you, almost as if they're etched into your brain. I had just pulled into the driveway after a long shift at the factory. The sun was setting behind me, casting a golden glow over the neighborhood. I was feeling the kind of tired that seeps into your bones, the kind you can't shake off with a good night's sleep. It was then that I noticed it, an empty spot where my car should have been. At first I thought maybe she'd taken it out for a spin, but my gut told me something else was going on. Susan, my wife of 25 years, had been distant lately. There was a tension between us, silent but palpable, like static in the air before a storm. I tried to ignore it, chalk it up to stress or the regular wear and tear of a long marriage. But now, staring at the patch of oil-stained concrete, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. I walked through the front door, my mind already a whirlwind of questions. Susan was in the kitchen, her back to me, slicing vegetables like she didn't have a care in the world. I stood there for a moment watching her. She was humming softly to herself, a tune I didn't recognize. I cleared my throat and she turned around, a smile plastered on her face. It looked real enough, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Hey," I said, "where's the car?" She didn't flinch, didn't miss a beat. "Oh, I sold it," she replied, casual as anything. It took a second for her words to sink in. I blinked, trying to process what she'd just said. "You did what?" "I sold it," she repeated, her tone annoyingly even. "We needed the money, Gary. And let's be real, you've got your truck, we didn't need two cars." A cold anger started to rise in my chest. "Susan, that was my car. You can't just sell it without telling me." Her expression soured, the smile dropping as quickly as it had appeared. "I can and I did," she snapped, turning back to her vegetables. "Besides, we both know we need to make some changes around here." The way she said changes set off alarms in my head. I tried to keep my voice steady, tried not to let the anger take over. "Who'd you sell it to?" She shrugged, not bothering to look at me. "Some guy from Craigslist. He came by this afternoon and picked it up." That's when it hit me, the realization slamming into me like a freight train. The title was still in my name. She might have handed over the keys, but legally that car was mine. I didn't say anything right away. Instead, I turned on my heel and headed for the door, needing to clear my head, to get some air before I said something I'd regret. As I walked, the cool evening breeze helped calm the storm of emotions swirling inside me. Betrayal, anger, disbelief, they all mixed together, leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. Susan and I had been together for so long, through ups and downs, thick and thin. I thought I knew her, thought we were a team. But now, staring at the darkening sky, I realized I'd been living with a stranger. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I knew I had to get to the bottom of this. I spent the day tracking down the Craigslist buyer, using the emails and messages Susan had left on the computer. It didn't take long. The guy was surprisingly easy to find. He was understanding when I explained the situation, even apologetic. We arranged to meet up the following day, and he promised to return the car once everything was sorted out. By the time I got home, Susan was gone. Just a note on the kitchen counter saying she'd gone to her sister's for a few days. I crumpled it in my fist, 1,000 thoughts racing through my mind. Was it guilt driving her away, or something else entirely? I didn't know. But what I did know was that something had shifted between us, something fundamental, and there was no going back. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the silence weighing heavily on me. I thought about our life together, the years we'd built side by side, and I realized that this was just the beginning of the unraveling. How did it come to this? I felt lost, adrift in my own life, unsure of what the next step would be. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not this time. The morning after Susan left for her sister's, I sat at the kitchen table staring blankly at the cup of coffee in front of me. It had long gone cold, but I couldn't bring myself to care. My mind was like a broken record, looping the events of the past few days over and over, until all I could hear was static. I knew I had to confront Susan eventually, but I wasn't ready, not yet. First, I needed to get my car back and gather my thoughts. I needed to understand just how deep this betrayal ran. Was it just the car or something more? My gut told me it was just the tip of the iceberg. The guy from Craigslist, Mark, turned out to be decent enough. We met at the local diner, a neutral ground where we could sort things out without getting the neighbors talking. He was a wiry, nervous sort of guy, but his eyes were honest when he shook my hand. "I'm really sorry about all this," Mark said, sliding into the booth opposite me. "I had no idea she didn't have your permission to sell the car. I should have thought something was fishy, the way she rushed the sale, but I guess I just saw a good deal and jumped on it." I nodded, appreciating his candor. "Thanks for agreeing to meet up. I just want to get this squared away." We talked through the details and Mark agreed to meet me at the DMV the next day to transfer the title back. He even offered to pay for the paperwork, which was more than I could have hoped for. As I left the diner, a small weight lifted off my shoulders. One problem down, 1,000 more to go. With the car situation on its way to being resolved, I turned my attention back to Susan. The idea of going through her things felt wrong, like invading a stranger's privacy. But I needed answers, and if she wasn't willing to give them to me, I'd have to find them myself. Her laptop was still on the desk in our shared home office, untouched since she'd left. I sat down, hesitating for a moment before opening it. Her passwords weren't hard to crack. Birthdays, anniversary dates, easy guesses for someone who'd known her half his life. My heart pounded as I sifted through emails, bank statements, anything that might explain the sudden shift in our lives. I felt like a detective piecing together a crime, except this one was personal, hitting closer to home than I'd ever imagined. The first bombshell came in the form of a bank transfer. A significant chunk of money, more than just the car sale, had been moved to an account I didn't recognize. My mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Was she planning to leave for good? Had she been siphoning money away for months or even years? The thought made my stomach churn. I kept digging, finding more transactions, each one a dagger to the trust I once had. The narrative was becoming clearer, though still incomplete. It seemed Susan had been planning her escape, slowly but surely. But why? What had driven her to this point? I found the answer buried deep in her emails, a chain of messages between her and a name I didn't recognize. David. My heart dropped as I read the words, each line like a slap to the face. They spoke of love, of plans for the future, of a new life without me. I slammed the laptop shut, the room spinning around me. It felt like the floor had fallen out from under my feet. 25 years, and this is where we ended up. I'd been so blind, so caught up in routine, that I hadn't seen the cracks until it was too late. That evening, I sat on the porch, staring out into the darkening sky. The anger that had initially driven me now simmered into something else, a cold determination settling in its place. I couldn't change the past, couldn't fix what Susan had broken, but I could make sure she didn't get away with lying and betrayal. I spent the next few days laying low, making plans. I contacted a lawyer, someone who specialized in cases like mine. With his help, I started the process of protecting what was left of my assets, ensuring Susan couldn't take anything else from me without a fight. It was a small comfort, knowing I was taking steps to regain control. But it didn't erase the pain, the sense of loss that followed me like a shadow. It was a lonely road ahead, one I hadn't planned for, but I was determined to walk it with my head held high. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the hurt and betrayal, I held onto a small ember of hope. Hope that one day I'd find peace in the chaos Susan had left behind. Hope that justice, in whatever form it took, would eventually find its way to those who deserved it. The following morning, I woke up to an unseasonably cold front, moving through town. As I stood by the window, sipping on a fresh cup of coffee that I actually intended to drink this time, I reflected on the whirlwind of revelations that had upended my life. The path forward seemed daunting, but there was no turning back. I was in uncharted waters, navigating the aftermath of a betrayal that ran deeper than I'd ever anticipated. I spent the day preparing for my meeting with the lawyer. I'd gathered every pertinent document I could find, bank statements, emails, anything that painted a clearer picture of Susan's deceit. As I organized the chaos into something resembling order, I felt a strange sense of empowerment. For the first time since she left, I felt like I was taking back control. Meeting with the lawyer, Tom, was a sobering experience. He was a no-nonsense type, middle-aged with graying hair and a demeanor that said he'd seen it all. As I laid out the situation, he listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. "You're doing the right thing by protecting your assets," he said, glancing up from his notepad. "But you need to be prepared for this to get messy. Divorces tend to bring out the worst in people." "I figured as much," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "What about the money she transferred? Is there a chance of getting any of it back?" Tom leaned back in his chair, contemplating. "It depends. If we can prove she moved it without your knowledge or consent as part of a plan to leave you, there's a case to be made. But it'll take time, and there's no guarantee." His honesty was both reassuring and disheartening. I knew this wouldn't be easy, but hearing it out loud brought the reality crashing down. There was a long road ahead, one that I wasn't entirely sure I was ready for. As I left the office, clutching a folder full of legal paperwork, I felt the weight of the situation pressing down on me again. The city seemed to move in slow motion, people bustling around me as if their lives hadn't just imploded. I envied their normalcy, their ability to go about their day without the specter of betrayal hanging over them. Back home, I sat on the porch again, watching the world pass by. This time, the anger I felt wasn't just directed at Susan, it was also at myself. How had I been so blind? How had I let things deteriorate to this point without realizing it? But self-pity wouldn't help me now. I needed a clear head to navigate the complicated landscape ahead. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, paperwork, and strategic planning. I fell into a routine of sorts, one that revolved around regaining stability. I reconnected with old friends, people I hadn't seen in years due to the comfortable cocoon of married life. They offered support, a reminder that I wasn't as alone as I felt. It was comforting but also bittersweet, an acknowledgement of the life I was slowly rebuilding. One afternoon, as I sorted through the pile of mail that had accumulated, I found a letter addressed to Susan. The return address was unfamiliar, but the name, David, sent a pulse of anger through me. Against my better judgment, I opened it, my curiosity piqued. Inside was a simple note, handwritten and brief. It spoke of how much he missed her, how he couldn't wait for them to be together again, and how everything was going according to plan. The words were a punch to the gut, a confirmation of everything I'd feared. But buried in the pain was also something else, a renewed determination. This letter was evidence, a tangible piece of the puzzle that would help me in the fight for what was rightfully mine. I carefully placed it with the rest of my growing collection of documentation. As much as I wanted to confront Susan, to demand answers and closure, I knew it wasn't the time. There was still too much at stake, too many moving parts that could unravel if I acted impulsively. Patience, though difficult, would be my ally. In the meantime, I focused on rebuilding and recentering my life. The house felt emptier, quieter without Susan's presence, but I was slowly reclaiming it as my own. Little by little, piece by piece, I was constructing a new reality, one where I could eventually find peace, even if it meant walking away from the remnants of a shattered past. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of the betrayal began to lift, ever so slightly. Though the process was slow, I found solace in small victories, in moments of clarity that reminded me I was capable of surviving this storm. Justice, in whatever form it took, was on the horizon, and I was determined to see it through to the end. As the weeks passed, an unexpected calm settled over me. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes with resolution. Rather, it was a stillness derived from the acceptance of my new reality. The chaos hadn't dissipated, but I'd grown more adept at navigating it, like a sailor who learns to read the storms. The morning routine of coffee and contemplation by the window had become a grounding ritual. The cold front had long moved on, replaced by the crisp, clear days of early spring. I found the change in seasons oddly symbolic, life pushing forward, indifferent to the personal upheaval that had become my norm. Tom had been diligent, working tirelessly to untangle the financial web Susan had woven. Every meeting with him unveiled another layer of complexity, each revelation a bitter reminder of how deeply the betrayal ran. Yet, there was satisfaction in the incremental progress we were making, each step bringing me closer to reclaiming what was mine. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling session with Tom, I decided to take a detour on my way home. I drove aimlessly at first, the familiar streets offering a strange comfort as memories of simpler times played out in my mind. I ended up at the edge of town, where the cityscape dissolved into sprawling fields punctuated by clusters of trees. I parked the car and walked, the cool breeze on my face a welcome respite from the suffocating weight of my thoughts. As I wandered, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from an old friend, Jake, asking if I was free for a drink that evening. Jake had been a constant fixture in my life, one of the few who had remained steadfast as everything else crumbled. I welcomed the distraction. Later, at a dimly lit bar we used to frequent in our college days, we settled into the worn wooden booths. The place was buzzing with the usual mix of laughter and clinking glasses, a stark contrast to the turmoil that had become my own personal soundtrack. "How are you holding up?" Jake asked, his tone casual yet infused with concern. I shrugged, taking a sip of my beer. "Some days are better than others. It's like learning to live with a part of you missing." He nodded, his expression understanding. "You've been through hell and back, but you're still standing, man. That's something." The conversation drifted to lighter topics, and for a while I allowed myself to be swept away by the nostalgia, the stories, and the laughter that came with revisiting old memories. It felt good to escape, if only temporarily. As we left the bar, Jake gave me a reassuring pat on the back. "Remember, you've got people who have your back. You're not in this alone." His words lingered with me as I drove home, the city lights reflecting off the windshield like distant stars. Despite the pain and the betrayal, there was a network of support forming around me, woven from old friendships and new alliances. Back at the house, I took a moment on the porch, watching the shadows play across the lawn. It was in these quiet moments that I found clarity, a chance to refocus on the steps ahead. The following morning, Tom called with news that tempered my guarded optimism. "We've found some of the money she moved," he said, his voice a mix of triumph and caution. "It's in an account under her name, but getting it back won't be straightforward. We need to act carefully." The revelation was a small victory, a sign that my efforts weren't in vain. Yet it also meant further legal battles, more layers to navigate. Determined, I threw myself into the preparations. Every document, every piece of evidence felt like a brick in the foundation I was rebuilding. The letter from David, with its incriminating words, became both my talisman and my curse. It was proof of the betrayal, but also a reminder of the love that once was, now twisted beyond recognition. As the days turned into weeks, I found solace in the therapeutic rhythm of routine. I resumed hobbies long abandoned, like painting and running, activities that brought a semblance of normalcy amidst the chaos. Then, one afternoon, a call came that shifted the tides once more. It was an unfamiliar number, and I answered with a cautious, "Hello?" "Is this Michael?" a woman's voice asked, her tone hesitant but urgent. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Emily. I'm a friend of David's." Or I was, until I found out who he really is. "I have information you might need." Her words hung in the air, electrifying and ominous. This was the break I hadn't dared to hope for, a chance to turn the tables. The road was still long, but the promise of justice glimmered on the horizon, a beacon guiding me through the darkness. As I prepared to meet Emily, a new sense of purpose took root. The path was fraught with uncertainty, but I'd come too far to turn back. Piece by piece, I was reclaiming my life, and with every step forward, the past loosened its grip. There was no telling what the future held, but for the first time in a long while I felt ready to face it head-on. The journey was far from over, yet I had learned to find strength in the struggle, and that alone was a victory worth fighting for. As I sat in my car, parked in front of the nondescript coffee shop where Emily and I had agreed to meet, a flood of emotions washed over me, anticipation, anxiety, and a flicker of hope I scarcely dared to acknowledge. The rain drummed softly on the roof, its rhythm steady and calming, a sharp contrast to the turmoil within. Emily had been cryptic on the phone, revealing just enough to pique my interest, but withholding the details. What kind of information did she have? And what did she mean by who he really is? These questions buzzed incessantly in my mind, refusing to be silenced. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out into the rain, pulling my jacket tight against the chill. The bell above the door jangled softly as I entered the cafe, its interior warm and inviting. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the soft hum of conversation, grounding me in the present moment. I spotted Emily immediately. She was seated at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug as she stared out the window. Her expression was pensive, a hint of tension in the set of her shoulders. As I approached, she glanced up, her eyes meeting mine with a mix of resolve and apprehension. "Michael?" she asked, her voice tentative yet steady. "That's me," I replied, offering a small, reassuring smile as I took the seat across from her. For a moment we sat in silence, the air between us charged with unspoken words. Emily seemed to be weighing her thoughts carefully, her gaze flickering to the window, before settling back on me. "Thank you for meeting me," she began, her tone softening. "I know this must be a lot coming from a stranger." I nodded, appreciating her straightforwardness. "I appreciate you reaching out. It's not every day someone offers to help, especially in a situation like this." She took a deep breath, as if gathering her courage. "I knew David through work. We were colleagues and for a while friends, but then I started noticing things that didn't add up. He had another side to him, one that he kept hidden." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. The David I knew had already caused enough damage, but the idea of a darker, more deceitful layer was chilling. "What kind of things?" I asked. My curiosity piqued, despite the dread settling in my stomach. Emily hesitated, taking a sip of her coffee before continuing. "For one, he was always very secretive about his finances, and he had a network of people, shady people, that he interacted with outside of work. I overheard conversations, saw documents. It was clear he was involved in something illegal, but I couldn't say exactly what." A knot tightened in my chest. Susan's betrayal had been devastating enough, but this revelation painted an even grimmer picture. "Do you have any proof? Anything that could help in court?" I asked, my mind racing with possibilities. She reached for her bag, retrieving a worn folder and sliding it across the table. "I've gathered what I could. Emails, bank statements, notes. It's not a complete picture, but it might be enough to connect some dots." I opened the folder, my eyes scanning the contents. It was a motley collection of documents, each one a potential piece of the puzzle I'd been trying to solve for months. "This is incredible," I said, my voice laced with gratitude. "Why are you helping me?" Emily's gaze softened, her expression one of sincerity. "Because I saw how he manipulated people, how he used them. And when I found out about you, about what he and Susan did, I couldn't just stand by. People deserve to know the truth, and you deserve justice." Her words were a balm to my wounded spirit, offering a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak landscape. "Thank you," I said, my voice earnest. "This could make all the difference." We talked for a bit longer, exchanging contact information and discussing the next steps. Emily promised to keep digging, to let me know if she uncovered anything else. As we parted ways, I felt a renewed sense of purpose, bolstered by the knowledge that I wasn't fighting this battle alone. Driving home, the rain had eased to a gentle drizzle, the city shrouded in a misty grey. I felt a strange sense of calm, as if the storm that had upended my life was finally beginning to subside. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Armed with Emily's evidence, I met with Tom, who was both surprised and relieved by the unexpected turn of events. We devised a strategy, carefully piecing together the narrative that would hopefully expose David's duplicity and reclaim what was rightfully mine. Throughout it all, I clung to a quiet determination, a resolve that had been absent in the early days of this ordeal. There were still hurdles to overcome, legal battles to wage, and emotional wounds to heal. But for the first time, I felt like the scales were tipping in my favor, that justice was within reach. The journey was far from over, but with each step forward I could feel the weight of the past lessening, the grip of betrayal loosening. In its place, a new foundation was emerging, built on resilience, truth, and the unwavering support of those who stood by me. And as I continued to navigate the uncertain road ahead, I held on to the belief that one day I would emerge from the shadows of this saga, not just as a survivor, but as someone who had reclaimed his life, piece by piece. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself diving deeper into the investigation Emily had helped set in motion. Armed with the folder of evidence and a renewed sense of purpose, I spent countless hours with Tom, my attorney, who sifted meticulously through every page, every email and every transaction that Emily had unearthed. We needed to build a cohesive case, something undeniable that would force the court to see the truth about David, and by extension, the web of betrayal that Susan had woven around me. Each document was like a breadcrumb, leading us further into the labyrinth of David's deceit. Bank statements hinted at offshore accounts, with money seemingly vanishing into thin air before reappearing in shell companies with obscure connections. It was a tangled mess, but one Tom assured me could unravel with the right legal pressure. My nights were restless, a mix of anticipation and dread churning inside me. I wrestled with the notion of justice versus revenge, two concepts that felt dangerously intertwined. On some level, I knew this was about righting the wrongs done to me, about reclaiming what was stolen. But there was also a darker, more primal satisfaction in the thought of seeing David, and indirectly Susan, pay for their duplicity. In quieter moments, I found myself reflecting on my marriage, questioning the years I spent with Susan and what they truly meant. Had it all been a lie, or were there genuine moments of love and connection obscured by the betrayal? These questions haunted me, their answers elusive and painful. Yet, beneath the hurt, there was a growing sense of liberation. For the first time, I was seeing the situation clearly, no longer blinded by the emotional fog of shock and grief. Meanwhile, Emily continued her own investigation, driven by a personal sense of justice that mirrored my own. We kept in touch regularly, each call or email revealing new layers to David's schemes. Her determination was unwavering, and it inspired me to push forward even when the weight of it all felt overwhelming. One afternoon, I received a call from her that would mark a turning point in our quest. "Michael," she said, her voice urgent, "I think I found something big. Can we meet?" We agreed to meet at the same coffee shop, a place that had become a sanctuary of sorts amidst the chaos. As I drove through the city, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the streets. It was a rare moment of clarity, as if nature itself was signaling a shift in my fortunes. Emily was already there when I arrived, her face a mixture of excitement and determination. She wasted no time as I sat down, sliding another folder across the table. "I managed to track down one of David's former associates," she explained. "He was involved in some of David's earlier schemes, but got out before things went south. He's willing to testify." I opened the folder, my hands almost trembling with anticipation. Inside were transcripts of their conversations, corroborating everything we suspected. It was a breakthrough, the kind that could turn the tide in my favor. "This is incredible, Emily," I said, my gratitude evident in my voice. "With this, we might actually have a chance." Her smile was warm, yet there was a seriousness in her eyes. "I know how much this means to you, Michael, but remember, it might not be an easy fight. David still has resources, and Susan, she's unpredictable." I nodded, fully aware of the challenges ahead. But for the first time, I felt like we had the upper hand, a glimmer of justice within reach. "I understand. But with you and Tom by my side, I feel like we can finally bring this to light." The days that followed were a blur of legal proceedings and strategic planning. Tom was relentless, his resolve as fierce as my own. We filed motions, presented evidence, and began the arduous process of dismantling the facade David had constructed. As the court dates loomed closer, I prepared myself for the emotional toll it would inevitably take. I knew facing Susan in court would be one of the hardest things I'd ever do. The woman I'd shared my life with, now a stranger sitting across a courtroom. But this was necessary, a step I had to take to reclaim my life. As the trial began, I sat in the courtroom, my heart a steady drumbeat in my chest. My gaze swept over the room, taking in the faces, some familiar, some not. When Susan entered, our eyes met briefly, a silent acknowledgement of the battles that lay ahead. There was a hint of defiance in her expression, but also something else, a flicker of uncertainty, perhaps even regret. Throughout the proceedings, I felt a surprising calmness wash over me. It wasn't the absence of fear, but rather a recognition that I was finally doing what needed to be done. I listened as Tom presented our case, piece by piece, laying bare the machinations that had ensnared me. Emily's testimony was powerful, her words weaving a narrative that was both damning and irrefutable. When David's former associate took the stand, the tension in the room was palpable. His testimony was the linchpin, the undeniable truth that could not be ignored. As the trial drew to a close, I sat quietly, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. It had been a long, painful road, but with each step, I'd discovered pieces of myself I thought were lost. Resilience, strength, a capacity for forgiveness that was still germinating within me. In the days following the trial, the verdict finally came. It was a bittersweet victory, one that brought justice, yet left a lingering ache for what could have been. But as I stood outside the courthouse, the sun warm on my face, I knew I had emerged from the shadows, ready to rebuild and reclaim my life. And as I walked away, I carried with me the knowledge that I was not defined by betrayal, but by the strength to overcome it, piece by piece.